All right, very good. So we are now on lesson 10, which is the stories of the presentation in the temple and the finding in the temple. So these are the last two of the joyful mysteries. These are, of course, important mysteries, like many of them, and they are particularly important about the infancy, the childhood of our blessed Lord. And so let's take a minute then and let's look at these two mysteries, the fourth and fifth joyful mysteries. All right, so the fourth joyful mystery is the presentation of the child Jesus in the temple and the purification of his blessed mother. And this was done because of what happened in Egypt. If you remember the story from the Old Testament, that when the Israelites were in Egypt, to free them, God sent many plagues on the Egyptians to convince them to let them go, and they wouldn't do it. And so finally God killed the firstborn of everyone in Egypt, but not of the Israelites, because of the blood of the Passover lamb. And so in commemoration of the fact that God did not kill the firstborn of the Israelites, every firstborn had to be, a sacrifice had to be offered for those children, because God did not take their lives. And so that is why, in obedience to this law of God, Mary and Joseph are in the temple. In this story, you hear Simeon prophesy about who Jesus is and what's going to happen to him and to Mary, and he calls him Christ. Christ means anointed, the anointed one. And this is where the oil is poured or put onto someone as a sign that they have a special assignment from God. And that was usually for priests, for prophets, and for kings. And Jesus is all three of those. We also see in this story, finally, something very important, that Simeon tells Mary that she's going to be very sad, very sorrowful, because of what's going to happen to Jesus. And so we also honor Our Lady's sorrows and the fact that she suffered so much, having to watch her son suffer and die because of our sins. And so we honor Our Lady of Sorrows, particularly in September, and we offer her our apologies, because it's our sins that crucified Jesus and made her watch that, and so we apologize to her for that. Before we move on, another story that's worth looking at that's connected to this is after the event of the presentation, which was 40 days after Jesus' birth. Between the time after this and before he grows up, the three wise men, the three magi, the three kings are going to visit, and they're going to be told, Joseph is going to be told, because of their visit, Herod is going to try and kill baby Jesus, and so they fly to Egypt to get away from him. And so that is a good story to remember about the time that Jesus is a little child as well. All right, finally we've come to the last of the joyful mysteries, which is the finding in the temple of the child Jesus in the temple. But we've already spoken about the temple in the last joyful mystery, but let's speak a little bit about what the temple is. Why was it so important? Well, the two things. First, the temple is where God dwelt. This is where he lived, so to speak. That's where God's presence was in a special way. He was in the temple in a special way. And also it was where he was worshipped. This is where sacrifices and prayers were offered, and people were taught how to follow him better. And Jesus himself then fulfills the temple, because Jesus is God dwelling among us, God with us. That's what Emmanuel means, God with us. Jesus is himself the temple, and we're going to see later in the gospel that he's going to call himself the temple, because he is where God dwells and lives among us. And Jesus is also where God is worshipped. In other words, we who are members of Christ, we worship God in Jesus. And therefore that makes him the temple. Now, this story has a very interesting line. What does he call God? He says, "My Father." He's referring to God the Father, which shows that Jesus knew who he was. He had a human nature, he had a human mind, he had a human heart, a human body and soul, but he also knew that he was God. He knew that from his entire life, and we see that in this story. that God is his Father and that he knows that. After this story, and prior to getting to the next mystery, the first luminous mystery, there is a period of time between Jesus being 12 years old in this story and his starting his public life at the age of 30, which we call his hidden life. And there's not a lot in the Bible about it, but it is good to know because it's a good example to children to be obedient to their family, to learn from their parents, and to grow as human beings, because Jesus did the same thing and they should follow his example. Very good. So from these mysteries, this gives us a good opportunity then to talk about family. Now, our families can be messy. We don't always have to get along with them. But one of the things we have to remember is that family is so important. Now, family is not more important than God. Family is not more important than church. But family is more important than school and anything else in this life. And so we want to respect the way that God has made the family. He's given us family because it's in the family that we're born, and it's in the family that we learn about him. It's in the family that we should be coming to Mass. So we want to respect the way that God planned this. So in other words, he created it so that man and woman, one man and one woman, can unite themselves in the sacrament and have children then, so that they can raise children to go to heaven. And so when it comes to our lives, our families are very important. On the supernatural level, on the spiritual level, it's the church, and on the natural level, on the human level, it's in the family. And so we want to love and honor our family. We never choose our family over God. God always comes first, but family is very important. We want to respect and love our family and to contribute and live our life at home the best we can, because of how important marriage and the family is. So we're going to talk about that a little bit in this lesson, and it's a good opportunity then for us to talk about the fourth commandment.